This is listener-supported community radio, KAAD-LP 103.5 on your FM dial, Sonora, California, and streaming on www.kaad-lp.org. I'm Wendy Ledger with the Golden Nuggets of the Motherlode, brought to you by the Sonora Writers Group and Tuolumne County Arts. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to local writer Amy Lee. Amy lives in Jamestown, California, along with her very patient husband and her Chihuahua dachshund, Pepito the Bad Hat. She is a voracious reader and worked in the book publishing industry for more than 20 years, but didn't start writing until about 11 years ago. When she moved up to Tuolumne County, it was to trade the hectic world in the Bay Area for a more creative, nature-centered life. The stories that live in her head keep her awake at night, and she is compelled to write them. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, yes, it's totally a pleasure. So I have to say right off the start that at some point in our friendship, I'm going to need to see pictures of Pepito.
Oh, I can do that. I won't leave here today unless you see pictures of him.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a deal. So I think that everyone loves to hear stories about how people become writers. So you started writing 11 years ago. Mm-hmm. What happened then that made you start to write?
Well, my husband and I were selling our house in San Leandro. We had lived there for 19 years. We had purchased it from my grandparents. And so you can imagine that not only did we have all of our stuff, we also had my grandparents' things and my mother's things. It was a lot of things.
And all the memories.
Yes. And, we packed and cleaned and got it ready to be shown and sold it really quickly. But then we still had more to pack and more to clean. And, our brains are interesting machines.
Yes.
And while we were, quickly trying to get out of that house, all of a sudden, I just had to sit down and write a story about my grandfather.
Yeah.
And that distraction was so irritating for my husband. But I wrote this little story about my gramps, and I loved it. I loved the story. It wasn't very well done. It wasn't very good writing, but it delighted me.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure it honored him too.
Yeah, and he was an interesting man. And I adored him. He was somebody very important in my life. And so, that was how I kind of started that. And I just kept collecting those little stories. And then I had a blog. And then I started doing some poetry. And that was how it started.
Yeah. So
totally not knowing what I was doing. And I still don't.
I think that's a story of every writer in the world.
I don't know about that.
But when you had a blog, what kind of things were you writing about on it?
Family stories,
yes.
But also writing about my process, things that frustrated me, things that made me happy, and then just some poetry stuff.
Yes.
And none of it was great, but it was really good experience. And I kind of dismantled that blog, but I am now trying to reassemble it again and relearn how to do all of that HTML stuff.
So I was really intrigued by the notion that stories kept you awake at night and that you have to put them down.
Yes.
So, every writer writes differently, has different routines. So is part of your writing routine like being up at night and having to put something down, or how do you write?
It's a lot of different things. Things come to me in my dreams. It's not so much writing late at night, although that is one of the things I do. But when I wake up in the morning, it's that time before you're really fully awake, where you're just sort of laying in bed. And of course, this doesn't really happen during the work week, but on the days that I don't have to get up super early. And I'm just sort of laying in bed and just thinking all of the millions of little thoughts that go through your brain. And that is sometimes when my ancestors talk to me.
Okay.
They tell me what they think. They tell me, and I know that sounds crazy, believe me.
Not to me. Not to me.
And they tell me how they talk and what they would say and what they think about what I'm doing.
Uh-huh.
And it was kind of a surprising process.
Yeah.
It kind of took me, I wasn't prepared for it.
Right.
And it just sort of started happening. And I realized that with all the research I've done and all of the letters that I've written and all of the stories that I've learned through the family, that my ancestors are actually talking to me.
Mm-hmm. So when you say ancestors, how many generations are you going back?
I actually wrote that down because I kind of couldn't believe it. But it's from then to now. So my daughter would be the 7th generation.
Right.
So my book encapsulates 7 generations.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And you mentioned like letters and phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you conducting all of this research?
It's been extensive, and it has been asking my mother's first cousins. So these are all people that are in their 80s and now approaching their 90s, for little stories, for their remembrances. And when I first started, they were not particularly cooperative.
Why?
I think they thought I wanted the dirt on my mom.
Oh, right.
I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Right, like flat out gossip. Yeah, yeah.
And after I refused to quit asking, I think they finally believed that I really did want to learn about the family at large. I wanted the stories. I wanted their memories. I wanted to learn about where I came from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so now the cousins are very cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
And so between their stories and the letters that I've found, which is part of the book,
okay,
and the documents and just the historical research that I've done, this story has come to life.
Okay. And when you say historical research, are you talking about like ancestry, that kind of thing? I guess that's what
Ancestry.com.
Yeah.
There's a ton about my mom's family in Ancestry.com. So I've been able to, connect with a lot of family members. People, I mean, they're very, very far removed from me, but they've got pictures of my great-grandparents that I'd never seen before. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But also going to museums, and the little museums, like our Tuolumne County Museum. The little area museums are fabulous for getting research about an area or a people or a family.
Right.
You just have to be persistent.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we've kind of talked a little obliquely about your writing project now, but do you want to like flat out talk about what you're doing?
Yeah. So it's 7 generations. And it begins with my great-great-great-grandparents and their 10 children who left Missouri and came across the prairie and through the mountains and the Sierras to California. They were pioneers. They came in about 1853. And so it was after the gold rush.
Right.
But there was still gold panning in the area. There was still a lot of that going on. And so that's where the story begins. And we get to know my great-great-grandfather, Abijah.
Okay.
His parents, too, to a certain extent. But the story really sort of starts with him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think people who have never written a novel have different ideas on what it would be like Some
Yes.
people think it's like you just sit down and you write like chapter 1, the beginning, and then, later on it's the end. But I think that you and I both know that it's kind of a magical, mysterious, sometimes feeling frustrating and circuitous process.
Yes.
So I know that you've gone through different ideas about this project, how to do it. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. It started, it really started at the beginning was a eulogy for my mom that started as kind of a thank you letter poem before she passed away. And then after she died, I felt so much about those words that I had written, and I didn't want it to stop. I didn't want those feelings to stop. And I realized if I don't write down my memories of my mother, my daughter's children, grandchildren, won't know who she was. And I didn't want that to happen. And right after my mom died, I was frantic to preserve her life after death.
Right.
And so I just started writing all of these little things. So my book started at the end.
Okay.
And I've worked backwards. And then I've worked forwards. And it started as, as this kind of thank you letter to her. And then it became a memoir. And I did that for quite a while. And there was a woman in the Sonora Writers Group who kept saying to me, why don't you just make it a fictionalized book? It might be a lot easier for you, because I was having a hard time. I was having a hard time figuring out how to allow the people in my family to talk in the book and to really make those conversations come alive and not be stilted.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I fought that because it wasn't my idea. And I also felt like I've got to remain true to the family. I've got to remain true to the idea. And so I fought it. But then suddenly one day I realized that was the way to go, to fictionalize it. And as soon as I did that, everything opened up.
Isn't that wild when it does that?
Yeah. And the writing just flowed. And, so yes, it is fictionalized, but it's about real people and real events and real history that I have worked very, very hard to make it complete and make it accurate. Mm-hmm. I don't want a history buff to read my book and say, wow, she really did not know what happened. Mm-hmm. That is a big fear for me. So I've been scrupulous.
And that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So when these ancestors come to you in your dreams, mm-hmm. like, do they tell you, like, this is how it was, or this is how I felt, or is there like a general theme of what they're talking about when they talk to you, or is it all across the board?
It's it's so interesting and so strange. I really am learning how they spoke and what was important to them and who they loved and the things that they liked. I've put myself in their shoes. Mm-hmm. And it's really kind of a combination of things.
Yeah.
So I don't exactly know how to explain it.
I know, I do.
And I hope it comes clear.
No, I understand. I definitely have had characters or stories come to me in dreams. And I've had the unfortunate, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I had one time where I had a dream where I dreamed a whole novel. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought, I'll remember this. No problem. This is down in my heart and my bones. And then I woke up the next morning and I could not remember it. Just had a vague inkling.
I've had a few things like that. Yeah. Where they've brought me ideas and I've been like, oh, this is such a sure thing. I'll never forget this. Yeah. And then the next morning it has evaporated.
Yeah. So then you learn.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do try to write things down, or even at least just a few key words.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said in your bio that you're a voracious reader. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, like, who do you like to read and who has inspired you?
Oh my gosh. Well, with regard to memoir, Anne Lamott,
Yeah.
I love her. I love the way she thinks. I love how clear and concise and simple, not easy, but simple her ideas are. And it's just so true to her heart. You know, her heart is on those pages.
Right. And she's so honest.
Mm-hmm.
I like that about her too, that she's willing to admit things that other people might consider being embarrassing. But to me, that's always like the best.
Yeah. But she's so readable.
Yes.
I love Ann Patchett.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Stephen King. And I love J.R.R. Tolkien. And I mean, I'm very across the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Thanks.
That's really wonderful. So why don't we hear a little bit of your work now?
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah. This chapter is called Museum of Wonder. Takes place in 1907, and we meet my grandfather, Hall, who was 9 years old. It was late May before spring finally arrived, and Mildred and her children were enjoying an unusually warm evening. Mildred was out in the garden cutting flowers and watching her boys play before the sun set. Hall and Ben were supposed to be weeding the vegetable patch, but instead were pretending they were soldiers, crawling around in the dirt and making loud booming noises to suggest cannon fire. They were having so much fun she couldn't bring herself to interrupt them. Her daughter Mildred, or Millie as she was called, was sitting on the back steps playing with her baby doll. "What shall we make the boys for supper, Millie?" "Oh, Mama, let's have bread and jam," said the 4-year-old. "Don't you think we could have some chicken and beans and applesauce?" "Yes, but only if we have bread and jam too." "All righty, my girl, come inside with your baby doll and help Mama." Millie set the table while Mildred got supper ready. "Mama, is Papa coming to eat with us?" "No, darling, Papa's in San Francisco. We won't see him until Friday night." "Mama, I wish we could have Grandpa and Grandmother and Harvey. When will they come?" "Millie, I know you want them to come, but Grandmother is so busy with Harvey. Maybe they'll come soon, though. I will write to them." "How come Harvey doesn't live with us, Mama?" "Oh, Millie, I wish he could. He's my littlest boy, and I love him just as I love you and Hall and Ben. But Harvey had a bad fall when he was a baby, and it hurt him so much. Now Grandmother and Mr. Patton are the best people to take care of him. And that's why Harvey lives with your grandparents. I miss him, Mama. I want him to come be with us. I want to play with him. I know, Millie, I want that too. Now you go outside and tell your brothers to come in to eat, and they had better wash their hands." Mildred waited until Hall and Ben sat down to breakfast before she delivered her news. "I've had a letter from Grandmother. She tells me your Grandpa Abijah's coming to visit on Saturday. Won't that be nice?" "Only Grandpa, not Harvey, not Grandmother," said Hall. "Just Grandpa this time. Mama, we're going to show him our museum. He'll like it, don't you think?" "He'll like it very much, Ben. I know he will." "I like your museum, Ben. Can I come see it again?" asked Millie. "Yes, you may, Millie, but only with Hall and me, or a grown-up. You cannot go by yourself. You are too little." "I'm not too little, Ben. I can do lots of things by myself." "Yes, Millie, you can, but Hall and I don't want you to go to the museum all alone. It's too dark in there, and we don't want you to be scared, and we don't want you to hurt yourself. Young lady, you listen to your brothers. They know what's right," said Mildred. "I won't go alone, I promise," said Millie resignedly. "Boys, it's time for school. You better leave now or you'll be late." As promised, Abijah came on Saturday. He loved seeing his grandchildren growing like weeds, and he always enjoyed a visit with his daughter-in-law and his son. Mildred had tea and cookies ready before Abijah arrived. The cookies were mostly edible, but she burned the bottoms of all of them again. After a shortened visit, she left Fred and his father to discuss milk cows and the law. At noon, the family came together for a simple meal of cold chicken and potato salad. Once the last person had finished eating, the boys could be still no longer. Fred excused them from the table along with little Millie. She tagged along after them into the yard. Mr. Woodworth, you better go see what your grandsons have done. They've been up since before dawn, perfecting their surprise, said Mildred. Abijah wandered out into the yard to find the boys. Millie was sitting sullenly on the porch. She had been told she was not invited to view the museum. What's wrong, little girl? Asked her grandfather. Hall says I'm too little to see the museum today. He says it's just for the men. Oh, well, you should stay here then, don't you think? Mama said I'd better be on my best behavior today, so I guess I'll just wait for you to come back. Hall and Ben were very excited to have their grandfather to themselves. They planned to ask him a special favor. Grandpa, next time you come to visit, do you think Harvey can come too? Hall asked. That might be arranged. You miss your little brother, don't you? We miss him every day, sir. Benny and I have been creating a most wonderful museum, and we want him to see it. We think he would like to see all of our treasures on display. Yes, Grandpa, Ben chimed in. We think it would be good for Harvey. Yeah, well, I would like you boys to give me a grand tour of your museum first. Then I'll decide if Harvey might like it. He gave both the boys a wink and held out his hands for them to grasp. Lead on, gentlemen. The three walked up to the little storage shed by the barn. The shed, little more than a free-standing closet, had been scrupulously cleaned and cleared by the two oldest children. It used to house rakes and shovels and gopher traps. Now, as the sign indicated above the door, it was the home to the Woodworth Brothers Museum of Wonders. Hall lit an old kerosene lantern and handed it to the old man. You better go in by yourself, Grandpa. I don't think there's room for 2 children and 1 adult. Ben gave his grandpa a little shove, and he and Hall backed up a bit from the doorway, giggling happily. The shed was quite dark, and Abijah thought it was a shame there wasn't a window or two to add to the natural light. The old wood had expanded and shrunk many times over the years, and the sun managed to spill through the cracks and create interesting patterns in the gloom. The lantern was necessary and lent a bit of extra drama to the whole affair. Inside were the boys' most prized possessions. Hanging from the ceiling was a lot of giant sunflowers. What are your plans for all these flowers? Abijah asked. We're going to eat them, Grandpa. First we have to dry them, then we'll soak them in a little salt water, then we'll roast the seeds, replied Hall. You'll share them with me when they're ready? Yes, Grandpa. We'll have enough for everyone, said Ben. On display were feathers the boys had collected from at least a dozen varieties of local birds and abandoned nests, some with little shards of eggshells still in them, a rattlesnake skin with a rattle still attached, a bleached cow skull, 14 perfect obsidian arrowheads found by the lagoon last summer. Who is the artist? Is that you, Hall? Abijah saw 6 cartoon drawings signed Hall Woodworth tacked up on one of the walls. Yes, sir, I've been practicing. I'm going to be an artist when I grew up. But I'm also going to be a dairyman, just like you, Grandpa, Hall said proudly. Grandpa, I'm going to be a dairyman too, said younger brother Ben. Did you see my schoolwork? A+ for penmanship. Very nice, Benny. You have a beautiful handwriting. The old men noticed the boys had shoved cattails, lavender wands, eucalyptus leaves, and delicate dried blooms of Queen Anne's lace in old bottles. In one corner was an old coffee can that rattled with spent rifle shells and shotgun cartridges when shaken. On every available surface was a collection of rocks and seashells, moss, and pine cones. The centerpiece of the museum was a cardboard and paper model of the Call building on Market Street in San Francisco. The building had withstood damage from 1906 earthquake and subsequent fires, but still remained standing. The first time the boys were allowed into the city with their father after the Great Quake, they had been entranced with the huge building standing amongst all the rubble. Upon their return home, Hall and Ben decided they would build a replica in honor of the great building. The two labored for weeks with the project and even enlisted their father to help cut away the many windows and doors. The finished product stood about 4 feet tall by about 18 inches wide and 18 inches deep. It held the center place of honor in the museum, sitting on a wooden crate in the middle of the floor. Museum visitors had to move the crate around carefully in order to view all the rest of the wonders. This is magnificent, grandsons. I believe you have created a fine museum filled with so many delights. Perhaps, though, you should be charging admission. You could have a little jar where patrons can deposit payment. Ever one to encourage commerce, Abijah smiled gleefully at the boys. What is your favorite thing, Grandpa? Asked Ben shyly. Why, your replica of the Call building, of course. It's a masterwork of architecture, and you boys did a wonderful job. There is no doubt about it. Harvey must come visit your museum. We're so glad you think so. We can't wait to show him, said Hall. But you boys must do something very important first. What's that, Grandpa? You must invite your little sister to see your museum again. When you told her she couldn't come with us today, you broke her heart, and I'll not have it. She's sitting on the back porch waiting. Do the right thing, boys. I know you will.
That is wonderful, Amy.
Thank you.
I just love that notion of one's own museum.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
And they really did it.
Yeah, I thought so.
And my Uncle Ben, who I had a chance to meet, actually he ended up moving at the end of his life to South Dakota. And he had an enormous barn filled with Indian artifacts that he worked with the local museum and colleges nearby. So museum work was really part of his life.
That's really incredible.
Thank you.
So I so admire your persistence and perseverance in doing this work. I am really excited for the book.
I am 2020. This year, I am going to finish the book.
Yes. And thank you for coming here today. And
Thank
thanks
you
for being such an
me.
important member of the Sonora Writing Group. I always love seeing you there.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for having me.
Okay.
It was great.
Okay. So, and thank you to our sponsors, the Sonora Writers Group and Tuolumne Council County Arts, and to the kind folks at KAAD-LP 103.5 FM, streaming at kaad-lp.org. Bye for now.